In this video, we're going to look at royal wedding dresses throughout history to find out how British royal brides dress on their big days, how much royal wedding dresses cost, what the oldest royal wedding dress still in existence is, who started the trend for wearing white, and who wore a second-hand dress. Make sure you stay till the end to hear which of the gowns I discuss are my favourite and least favourite. Historically, European brides, royal or otherwise, didn't have a specific dress for their wedding, which would never be worn for anything else in the way that most brides do today. You simply put on your nicest dress, and for royal brides that might be very nice indeed, and off you went. Perhaps if you had the time and money or the skill set, you could have a new dress made up for the event, but you'd reuse it after the wedding. There also wasn't a specific colour scheme for wedding dresses as there is today, with white or cream being the standard. Even royal wedding dresses of the past simply followed the fashions of the day and could be of any colour. Thus, when we look at historical images of them, we don't see any unifying factor except that they were all expensive and gorgeous items of clothing for the time period. Now, of course, some images were not created from life, and the artist simply imagined the royal wedding. For instance, a late 15th century image of the marriage of Louis de Blood to Mary of France, daughter of the Duke of Berry, shows them in the fashions of the Illuminator's day, and not the fashions common in 1386 when the wedding actually took place. Still, the fact that the dresses all look so different proves that there was no such thing as a standardized wedding dress, and you wouldn't even know which woman is the bride if she wasn't standing or kneeling in front of the minister or priest alongside the groom, possibly with a crown or tiara on her head. The need to imagine her attire also proves another point, which is that royal wedding dresses of the past weren't given the kind of attention that they receive in the 21st century. In some wedding portraits, they can barely be seen, such was their lack of importance. Nowadays, there would be outrage if a royal wedding dress wasn't photographed and filmed from every angle to be dissected by fashion pundits from all over the world. So now let's look at some specific brides for whom we have reliable images and descriptions of their dresses. And bear in mind that I can only fit a selection of women into this video for reasons of time, so apologies if someone's missing who you wanted to see. I will be talking about some who didn't make this list over on my Patreon this week though, where I'll be releasing a bonus podcast for my time traveller and historical figure patrons, so you always have the option to check that out too. If you don't want to take out a monthly membership, which would give you access to my entire archive of content for that tier and the lower tiers, you can also buy many of my posts as a one-off. I'll leave the link below for you. We begin with Caroline of Brunswick, who married her first cousin, the future George IV of the United Kingdom, on the evening of the 8th of April 1795 in St James's Palace. We have a painting of the ceremony which shows Caroline in a silver gown with 3/4 length ruffled sleeves, a square neckline and a crisscross pattern, complete with tassels all over the voluminous skirt, which then pulls on the floor behind her in a train. Attached to her shoulders is a mantle which the Times newspaper described as crimson velvet trimmed with ermine. Rather than a bouquet, she carries a fan, and it was the bridesmaids who wore white rather than the bride, though she does have a crown with red velvet cap on her head, which the Times remarked was studded with diamonds. Another portrait shows her in the same dress, allowing us to get a better look at her diamond necklace and bracelets, and at what appears to be a tiny portrait of her husband attached to the middle of the dress's bust. The overall effect is one of great wealth, and there can be no doubt that the dress was spectacular, even if the Times didn't care to provide any description of it at all, save the mention of the mantle which I just read out to you. However, this was a marriage which was to be a disaster. The bride and groom hated one another, apparently only slept together once within 24 hours of the ceremony, and were grateful that this was enough to get Caroline pregnant. Their only child was Princess Charlotte of Wales, and it is to her that we turn next. Before we get to her though, just a quick reminder to please like, hype and comment on the video, as this really helps it to do better, and subscribe to the channel with the notification bell on. And if you're already subscribed, maybe check your notification status, as I get people telling me sometimes that YouTube isn't notifying them even though it should be. You might also like to join as a channel member for badges next to your name in the comments and members only posts. Born in January 1796, Charlotte grew up as second in line for the throne and expecting to be queen. On the 2nd of May 1816, she married Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, later the King of the Belgians, at Carlton House in London. Now, I actually already have a video all about her wedding dress, so I'm going to shamelessly self-plagiarise a little bit of the information I researched for that and encourage you to watch it after this video to learn more about this dress and the wedding in general. The gown was created by a London-based dressmaker known only as Mrs. Triod of Bolton Street, and the Morning Post newspaper described it as follows. The wedding dress, comprised of a most magnificent silver lama or net, lama was a strip of silver or silver gilt, over a rich silver tissue slip with a superb border of silver lama embroidery at the bottom, forming shells and bouquets. Above the border, a most elegant foiling, tastefully designed in festoons of rich silver lama and finished with a very brilliant rollio of lama. I think this means a roylieu, which is an ornamented band. The body and sleeves to correspond, trimmed with the most beautiful Brussels point lace in a peculiarly elegant style. The manteau, which was the train of the dress, of rich silver tissue lined with white satin, trimmed round with a most superb silver lama border in shells to correspond with the dress, and fastened in front with a most brilliant and tasteful ornament of diamonds. The whole of the dress surpassed all conception, particularly in the brilliancy and richness of its effect. Headdress, a wreath of rosebuds and leaves, composed of the most superb brilliants, meaning gemstones. Other newspapers inform us that the manteau was 2.5 yards long, and that as well as the rosebuds and leaves headdress made of brilliants, Charlotte wore a necklace of a single row of large brilliants of the finest lustre, with large drop earrings to correspond, and a brilliant cestus, which is a bridal belt or girdle, of great value. We can see some immediate differences between this dress and that of her mother. First and foremost, fashions had changed, and Charlotte wore a much more streamlined Regency-style dress than that donned by Caroline, with a much simpler skirt and empire waistline. She also avoided a heavy tiara, though she certainly didn't skimp on her headdress, as that rosebuds and leaves made out of gemstones sounds very nice indeed. What is all the more remarkable about this dress, though, is that we still have it, or at least parts of it. The dress you see today, displayed as Princess Charlotte's wedding dress, has in fact been considerably reworked over the years, for people in the past reused their clothing far more than we do today, as cheap fast fashion didn't exist yet. The apron added to the front is not original. The embroidered net on the skirt contains different designs, and much of the ornamental detail, such as the presence of bouquets, is missing or different from contemporary descriptions. In fact, upon closer examination of the fabrics and hemlines, it was obvious to conservators who studied the dress that the entire garment had been dismantled and put back together again, but not from the same parts. In other words, what we have today is a mishmash of dresses, and very little of it appears to come from Charlotte's wedding gown. For as one such conservator, Kay Stanaland, says, and her article about the garment is linked below for you, once you discount the train and the skirt from this empire-waisted short-sleeve dress, there's not much left. Instead, quote, most of the ensemble was originally a court dress, almost certainly one used by Princess Charlotte, to which has been added a few relics of her original wedding dress, that is, the shell-ornamented borders on bodice sleeves and apron-like front section, and the rouleau on the latter. Following Stanaland's lead, the Royal Collections website also admits that most of what we see today is not part of the original garment, saying that, although associated with Princess Charlotte, the skirts and train may not be original to the ensemble. The best view we'll ever get of the original dress is an 1816 drawing we have of it, though it has inaccuracies. The attachment of the train to the shoulders is incorrect, for instance. You might see this touted as the oldest surviving royal wedding dress, at least in Britain, but just bear in mind that most of it was not worn by Charlotte on the day. Sadly for Charlotte, her marriage was terribly short and ended with her death in childbirth in November 1817 at the age of 21, along with her son. There followed the infamous royal baby race, during which her unmarried uncles rushed to get themselves respectable wives and legitimate heirs. I'll leave my video about it linked for you, but for now, all you need to know is that this led to the birth of Charlotte's cousin, Princess Victoria, in May 1819. Unlike Charlotte, Victoria actually would get to the throne in 1837, and in 1840 she married her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. Victoria's wedding dress has become the stuff of legend, largely because she is credited with popularising the use of white for brides, a tradition which continues to this day in most Western countries, so much so that it's rare to see the colour used in a full-length gown for any other reason. She was not the first royal bride to wear white, however. For example, we know that Mary I of England wore white satin for her marriage to Philip II of Spain at Winchester Cathedral in 1554, while her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, wore white to marry her first husband, the soon-to-be Francis II of France, in 1559, despite the fact that white was the colour of mourning in France, and the Duchess of York wore it as seen in a 1791 painting of her wedding. Victoria's dress was not what her advisors had initially wanted for her. She was the first reigning queen to marry since Mary I, and there was talk of her donning her coronation robes. She soon put paid to that. Instead, she opted for a simple white silk satin court dress, simple by royal standards that is, with a rounded, slightly sweetheart neckline that sat almost off her shoulders and short puffed sleeves. Fuller skirts were now back in fashion with natural waistlines, and Victoria's was pointed, with a series of pleats set into it and a 6-yard-long train behind her which was bordered with orange blossoms which offset the garland of the same flowers which she wore on her head and to which her veil was attached. There was no crown, and no doubt her floral headdress was much lighter and more comfortable to wear. The dress was made by the Queen's dressmaker, Mrs. Bettons, and was an all-British affair, with silk satin from Spitalfields in London and English lace trim. The dress may have been simple by regal standards, but it was garnished with enough jewels to support most families for life. Victoria wore the collar and star of the Order of the Garter and a sapphire and diamond brooch which her new husband had given her as a wedding gift. A diamond necklace and earrings completed the look. Moving on to the next generation of royal brides. Queen Victoria's oldest daughter, Princess Victoria, the Princess Royal, known as Vicky, married Frederick of Prussia on the 25th of January 1858, and the Times offered this description of her dress. It was manufactured by Mrs. Darville, designed by Miss Janet Fife, and composed of a rich robe of white moire antique ornamented with 3 flounces of Honiton lace. This was the same type of lace her mother's dress had used. The design of the lace consists of bouquets in open work of the rose, shamrock and thistle in 3 medallions, clear references to England, Ireland and Scotland. Sorry, Wales. At the top of each flounce in front of the dress are wreaths of orange and myrtle blossoms, the latter being the bridal flower of Germany, every wreath terminating with bouquets of the same flowers, and the length of each being so graduated as to give the appearance of a robe defined by flowers. You'll note that the orange blossoms echoed her mother's dress too. The apex of this floral pyramid is formed by a large bouquet worn on the girdle. The train, which is of the unusual length of more than 3 yards, is of white moire antique, trimmed with 2 rows of Honiton lace, surmounted by wreaths similar to those on the flounces of the dress, with bouquets at short intervals. Vicky had a sprig of myrtle in her bouquet, a German custom, from which a myrtle bush was grown which has supplied sprigs to royal brides ever since. She was a vision, and so too would be her sisters and sisters-in-law, though as she was one of 9 children and all of them married, I'm just going to talk about some of them here. Princess Alice was the next to wed, to Louis IV, Grand Duke of Hesse and by Rhine, on the 1st of July 1862 in the dining room at Osborne House. As her wedding took place after the death of her father, Prince Albert, however, Victoria had the whole court in mourning, and it was a sombre affair, which the Queen said was more like a funeral. Still, Alice had a gorgeous dress, though the Times offered no description of it in its account of the wedding, but photos show a voluminous skirt, as was fashionable in the 1860s, 3/4 length sleeves, an off-the-shoulder style for the main dress, with a modesty panel of material placed over the top of it to form a V-neck, no train, though there was a Honiton lace overlay on top of the dress, which fell to just below the bottom of the main skirt, and a Honiton lace veil, which fell to about knee-length. The headdress was like that of her older sister, a wreath of orange blossom and myrtle rather than a tiara, and she also wore a beautiful opal cross and brooch, as described in her mother's journal entry for the day. Next, we have Princess Alexandra of Denmark, who married Victoria's heir, the Prince of Wales and the future Edward VII, on the 10th of March 1863 in St George's Chapel at Windsor. The future Queen of the United Kingdom had a dress which befitted her new position. It was made of white silk and satin and trimmed with at least 5 garlands of orange blossom and myrtle around the bodice and skirt, from what I can see in the pictures. There was also the by now standard Honiton lace, which depicted roses, shamrocks and thistles to represent most of the countries of the United Kingdom, though again I feel for Wales not being included, especially as Alexandra was becoming its princess. The skirt also featured bouffants of tulle, the headdress was floral, and the bride wore a diamond necklace and earrings given to her by her groom. The dress was used to promote British manufacturers, with the maker being a Mrs. James of London, and for this reason Alexandra was not allowed to use a dress of Brussels lace given to her by her mother-in-law's uncle, King Leopold of the Belgians. The actual wedding dress was soon recycled so that the princess could wear it again, though the orange blossom garlands, lace flounces and veil still exist in their original condition. As with Alice's wedding, an air of gloom existed over everything thanks to Victoria's refusal to wear anything but black, to take part in the ceremony, instead she watched it from Catherine of Aragon's closet above the choir, or to allow anyone else to go out of mourning. There was also a need to have busts of the deceased Albert in the wedding photos. For Princess Helena's wedding to Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein at Windsor Castle on the 5th of July 1866, we have a description of the dress from Queen Victoria's journal, which recorded that Lention's wedding dress, Lention was what the princess was called within the family, was of white satin, trimmed with one superb flounce of Honiton lace, originally chosen for me by dearest Albert, and sprays of orange flowers and myrtles, and a very long train, trimmed with the same lace and flowers. The youngest of Victoria's daughters was Princess Beatrice, who married Prince Henry of Battenberg in St Mildred's Church at Whippingham near Osborne on the 23rd of July 1885. Her mother described the dress as follows. Her dress was quite simple, in ivory white satin, very long, trimmed with my wedding lace and some small garlands and sprays of orange blossoms, myrtle and white heather. Her jewels were diamonds. As Victoria alludes to here, Beatrice was given the honour of wearing the Queen's own wedding veil of Honiton lace, something none of her sisters had been offered, but Beatrice had a particular love of lace. The dress had short sleeves and quite a deep V-neck, which showed off the princess's cross necklace, and Queen Victoria added that she, Beatrice, wore besides the diamond circlet with diamond stars, one of the earliest mentions we get of a royal bride wearing a tiara or something close to it since Caroline of Brunswick. Images of the dress also show the changing fashions of the 1880s, for compared to her sisters and sister-in-law, Beatrice's skirt was narrower and less cumbersome, though the waist was still cinched in very tight. Just 8 years later, Beatrice's nephew, the future George V, married his dead brother's fiancée, Mary of Teck, the future Queen Mary, on the 6th of July 1893. The silhouette of the dress was very similar to Beatrice's, and the Lady magazine described it as follows. A very rich white satin, brocaded with silver. The long plain train looked as if it were perfectly capable of standing alone, and just the front of the skirt was of white satin. It was edged with 3 tiny satin flounces trimmed with silver, and above these were 3 flounces of the beautiful Honiton point lace. A trail of orange blossom on each side separated this satin front with its lace. The bodice was of silver brocade with the floral design so placed as to form its sole ornament, with the exception of the Honiton point round the neck and the wreath of orange blossoms over it, with small bouquets on the breasts and shoulders. The dress sat just off Mary's shoulders with cap sleeves, and Queen Victoria found it to be very simple, of white satin with a silver design of roses, shamrocks, thistles, and orange flowers interwoven. On her head she had a small wreath of orange flowers, myrtle, and white heather, surmounted by the diamond necklace I gave her, which can also be worn as a diadem, and her mother's wedding veil. The dress was created in Spitalfields by Linton & Curtis because, again, British manufacture was very important. We now move forwards to the 20th of February 1922, when Princess Mary the Princess Royal, daughter of George V and Queen Mary, married Viscount Lascelles, son of the Earl of Harewood, in Westminster Abbey. Fashions had moved on considerably since her mother's wedding, and we see what is obviously a 1920s silhouette in the princess's gown, with its looser and lower waistline. Though not tight, the dress was much less voluminous than anything seen so far, and no doubt lighter and more comfortable as a result. It was made by Messrs. Revel, and according to Vogue, which covered the wedding, was adorned with a trestle work of roses in pearls and crystal beads. I believe I also see a mini bouquet of what I imagine are orange blossoms at her hip. It had a long train, and the floor-length veil was held in place by what looks like a floral headdress. The dress's length, though, was not indicative of the shorter dresses women were now wearing day to day, and in that way we now see the beginnings of royal wedding dresses harking back to older designs rather than simply keeping up with the fashions of the day, albeit in white rather than colours. On the 26th of April 1923, Prince Albert, Duke of York, known in the family as Bertie and later as George VI, married Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon in Westminster Abbey. In a move which would be considered very poor form nowadays, the Times published details of the wedding dress 2 days before the ceremony, saying, "The dress to be worn by the bride is the simplest ever made for a royal wedding. It is of chiffon moiré, specially made to the old ivory tint required to tone with the veil of old Point de Flanders lent by the Queen. It is medieval in style, with the waist at the normal line. The bodice is crossed in front with bands of silver lame, embroidered with pearls and pearl beads and silver thread, a straight band of silver also richly embroidered being brought down the front of the gown. A simple wreath of orange blossom with a white rose at either side will be worn. The going-away dress is of a soft shade of dove grey crêpe romaine, which has a slight beige tint in it and is embroidered all over in its own colour. The bodice has short sleeves, and there is a coatee made on a band at the back. A travelling coat wrap of the same shade in crêpe marocaine will be worn. The bride will wear a small brown hat with upturned brim and a feather mount at the side." Pictures show that the descriptions of the dress were pretty accurate, if a little incomplete. We can also see its square neckline and Elizabeth's very long Maid Marian style veil, which trailed several feet behind her and was worn a little bit like a bonnet, close to the head and coming right down over her forehead. It was held in place with a wreath of myrtle leaves and white roses to represent the House of York into which she was marrying. Again, it was of course very 1920s, as one would expect. Her ivory silk moiré shoes also had silver roses embroidered on them, and like Princess Mary's dress, the gown was full length, which was no longer in keeping with day-to-day wear of the time for ladies. Skipping ahead to Bertie and Elizabeth's daughter, the one and only Queen Elizabeth II, then known as Princess Elizabeth, who married Philip Mountbatten Windsor on the 20th of November 1947, also at Westminster Abbey. Whole documentaries have been made about her wedding and dress, but I'm just going to give you an overview of it here. Designed by Norman Hartnell, who also later made her coronation gown, and inspired by a painting of Primavera by Botticelli, it was a full-length ivory satin gown with a fitted bodice, A-line skirt, long sleeves, and a scalloped slightly sweetheart neckline. The bodice and skirt were decorated with roses, pictures of wheat, and the skirt had an orange blossom border. The 15-feet-long circular train was decorated with white satin roses, stars, jasmine, lilac, smilax, and corn, picked out in diamond and pearls. It was held in place by the Queen Mary fringe tiara, which doubles as a necklace. The dress included 10,000 pearls brought in from the United States and required 350 seamstresses to make it in just 3 months, which was all Hartnell had once his final design was approved. Every woman working there, no matter how junior, was allowed to add at least 1 stitch, so that they could all say they'd worked on it. Here you can see samples of her wedding shoes, which were put on display in Hillsborough Castle, Northern Ireland. The dress had to be paid for using rationing coupons, as rationing was still in place in the UK at the time after World War II, and although Elizabeth was given an extra 200 coupons by the government, many people all over the country also sent in their coupons to be used towards her dress. They had to be returned though, as it was illegal to use them. The only estimate of its cost I could find was in American dollars, and apparently it was about $42,000. With Elizabeth, we see our first bride who was not wearing a dress that really followed the fashions of the day. Instead, it harked back to earlier styles, with its full length and full skirt, which was well out of fashion amongst young ladies in the late 1940s. This is a trend which has largely continued for royal brides ever since, and indeed for many commoners too. The silhouettes of wedding dresses are often from a bygone era. Moving on, Princess Margaret was married to Anthony Armstrong Jones, Earl Snowdon, on the 9th of May 1960. Again, Norman Hartnell was the dress designer. This gown, though, was much simpler than that of her sister, the Queen. It was silk with a large puffed-out skirt, fitted bodice with sheer sleeves and a V-neck. The skirt had 12 panels and a train was built into it rather than being a separate edition. The long veil, which trailed behind the princess as well, was made in Paris and held in place by her own Baltimore tiara, and the bouquet included myrtle. Queen Elizabeth's only daughter, Princess Anne the Princess Royal, married Captain Mark Phillips on the 14th of November 1973, which is the birthday of her brother Charles, by the way. Anne's dress was made by Maureen Baker at Susan Smalls and partly inspired by the Tudor era, with its huge, full-length trumpet sleeves. However, the skirt, though not fitted, was not particularly voluminous, and the high stand-up collar was a more modern twist. Like her Aunt Margaret's dress, the gown was overall quite simple, though the chiffon undersleeves were edged with pearls and jewels, and it had a 7-foot train. She wore the same fringe tiara worn by her mother, and it held in place her long silk net veil embroidered with flowers. Her bouquet also had a sprig of that same myrtle from the bush mentioned earlier in the video. Okay, we've reached the big guns, the dress a lot of you probably clicked on the video to see. It's time to talk about Lady Diana Spencer. Lady Diana married the then Prince Charles in St. Paul's Cathedral on the 29th of July 1981 in what is often called the wedding of the century. She needed a dress that would live up to the hype, and she got it. Designed by the husband and wife team David and Elizabeth Emanuel, Diana's dress set the standard for 1980s excess. The bodice had a deep flounce around the neckline with a large bow in the centre, and the 3/4 length sleeves had the trademark 80s puff and ended in a lace flounce. The skirt was in a ball gown style, meaning it was big, being held out by masses of ivory tulle and nylon net underneath it. Horror of horrors, it was terribly wrinkled when Diana got out of the carriage, but thankfully David Emanuel was able to smooth it out before she walked down the aisle. Behind her, Diana pulled an enormous 25-feet-long train that one can really only get away with when one is getting married in a huge cathedral. A tiny blue bow was sewn into the waistband to give her something blue, and her ivory silk tulle veil, sparkling with tiny sequins, was held in place by the Spencer tiara, a rare example of a non-royal bride who has not needed to borrow one from the monarch. It was a fairy tale dress for a fairy tale wedding, but sadly, as we all know, it didn't turn out to be a fairy tale marriage. On the 23rd of July, 1986, Sarah Ferguson married the then Prince Andrew, Duke of York, in Westminster Abbey. Her dress was designed by British designer Linka Sierak, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, she has Polish ancestry, I believe. It was made of ivory Duchess satin with a scoop neck at the front and a V-neck at the back. Sleeves were slightly puffed and came to just below Sarah's elbows where they ended in points. The dress and its 17-feet-long train were embroidered with the bride and groom's initials in silver and beads, as well as anchors and waves, a reference to Andrew's then job in the Navy, and bumblebees and thistles, representing Sarah's family heraldry. At the top of this train, where it met the dress, was a huge bow. On her head, Sarah wore a wreath of gardenias as she walked down the aisle, which were removed after the ceremony to reveal a wedding gift from the Queen and Prince Philip, the York Diamond Demi-Parure tiara, purchased from Garrett's and made of diamonds and platinum. Both were holding her huge silk veil in place, which was embroidered with bows. For Princess Anne's second marriage to Sir Timothy Lawrence in December 1992, the wedding was a much smaller affair than her first. It was held in Scotland with only 30 people present, and the princess opted for a knee-length skirt and matching jacket with high neck and full-length sleeves, both in cream, and with black shoes. Her hair was in a half updo and had a floral sprig on her left side. And that's really all there is to say about that outfit. It was low-key, like the wedding and the princess herself likes to be, and suited the occasion. In 1999, Prince Edward, Earl of Wessex, married Sophie Rhys-Jones in St George's Chapel, Windsor. Sophie wore a full-length silk organza coat dress designed by Samantha Shaw, with a flowing skirt, full-length sleeves, V-neck, and a relatively short train. It was decorated with more than 325,000 pearls and crystal beads, and her full-length silk tulle veil was held in place by a tiara on loan from the Queen. Very unusually for royal brides, Sophie was actually wearing 2 dresses in one. For the reception, she took off the outer coat part of the outfit and had another dress on beneath it, which was in a very similar style, same colour and full-length sleeves and V-neck. Before we head into the 21st century, if you want some free bonus material from me, don't forget to sign up to my mailing list on my website, historycallingofficial.com, so that you receive my newsletter as well as 2 complimentary downloads right away, which look at how you can tell the difference between good and bad history books and conduct interviews with your family members about your family tree. If you have Irish ancestry, you may also want to check out my book, Find Your Irish Ancestors Online, available from Amazon as an ebook or paperback. That's not free, I admit, but I think it's very well priced considering how much information is in it, and it's gotten some very nice reviews from people who have already checked it out. On the 9th of April 2005, Prince Charles finally married his long-term partner, Camilla Parker Bowles. As it was a second marriage for both of them and Camilla's first husband was still living, they had a low-key, by royal standards, wedding. It was held in the Guildhall in Windsor, and for the actual ceremony, Camilla opted to wear a knee-length, oyster-coloured chiffon day dress with matching silk coat over the top, with full-length sleeves and made by Robinson Valentine. It had a scalloped scoop neck. On her head was a matching hat made by Irish milliner Philip Tracy. The length of the dress echoed the decision made by Princess Anne for her second wedding, but like Sophie, there was another dress still to come. Charles and Camilla also had a church blessing later in the day at St George's Chapel, Windsor, and for this Camilla wore a different and more formal dress. Also designed by Robinson Valentine, it was full length and made in the same coat dress style that Sophie Rhys-Jones wore. The dress was pale blue chiffon, while the coat was a slightly darker blue and embroidered in gold, and was fastened across her torso, with the underdress visible beneath. On her head, she wore a striking golden Philip Tracy feathered headpiece. Neither outfit had a veil. Before we move on, an interesting fact you may or may not know or remember about this wedding is that it was originally meant to take place the day before, but had to be rescheduled at the last moment to allow Prince Charles to attend the funeral of Pope Jean-Paul. On the 29th of April 2011, Prince William, Duke of Cambridge, married Catherine Middleton, and the world went crazy for her dress. Designed by Sarah Burton at the House of Alexandra McQueen, Catherine's dress was made from ivory satin with padding on the hips to give her a full skirt which incorporated pleats and a bustle at the back and ended in a 9-feet-long train. A lace overlay on the bodice gave her a V-neck, and this lace also formed the fitted full-length sleeves and was applied to the bottom of the dress as well. It was embroidered with roses, thistles, shamrocks and daffodils for Wales, finally a bride on our list today who included that country. The gown fastened up the back with 58 gazar and organza covered buttons and cost a reported £250,000, though that figure has never been confirmed. It was paid for by Catherine's parents. On her head, she wore the 1936 Cartier halo tiara, which Elizabeth II had later received from her mother on her 18th birthday, and it held in place her veil, which was much shorter than many others I've discussed in this video, terminating at about thigh level. Her shoes were ivory satin heels with further lace embroidery, and for jewellery there were diamond earrings from her parents which showed oak leaves and acorns, and of course, a little later in the day, her new wedding ring. In the evening, Catherine literally let her hair down, removed the tiara, and changed into a strapless, floor-length ivory gown, also from the Alexandra McQueen fashion house, with a sweetheart neckline, an embellished belt, and an angora shrug over the top. To this day, I don't think we've ever seen a picture of it without that shrug. A few months after William and Catherine tied the knot, so too did his cousin Zara Phillips, who married Mike Tyndall in Scotland on the 30th of July 2011. Though there were 400 guests at the wedding, it was still very private by royal standards, with no cameras inside the church. Zara wore an off-the-rack Stuart Parvin gown of silk fell and Duchess satin, with a corseted bodice, square neckline, dropped waist, what looked like tulle straps and no sleeves. It was full-skirted with a very short train built in, just a couple of feet, and there was chevron pleating on the bodice. The full-length veil was tulle and was held in place by a tiara belonging to the bride's mother, Princess Anne, called the Greek key. On her feet were Jimmy Choo shoes, showing that she was not required to go all British in the way that more senior royals are expected to. Next up, we have Meghan Markle, who married Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, at St George's Chapel, Windsor on the 19th of May 2018. Bonus points for you if you knew offhand that that's the anniversary of Anne Boleyn's execution. Designed by the British designer Claire Waight-Keller, who was working for Givenchy, paid for by the bride and supposedly costing £100,000, the dress was made in Paris, and to my mind, what is most remarkable about it is its simplicity. Some wondered if the bride, who was a divorcee, would wear white, and she did, donning a full-length silk gown with three-quarter-length fitted sleeves, a boat neckline and a built-in train. There were no embellishments on it, though a small piece of the blue dress Meghan wore on her first date with Harry was stitched inside it. It was the 5-metre-long, 3-metre-wide veil, which was much more detailed than the dress, containing flowers representing all of the 53 Commonwealth countries, plus Meghan's native California, and also wintersweet, which grew outside the couple's home in Nottingham Cottage, plus wheat sheaves to represent love and charity. What about the Duchess of Sussex's accessories, though? Well, on her head was Queen Mary's diamond bandeau tiara, and the bride also wore Cartier diamond ear studs. On her feet were Givenchy pointed toe heels. Meghan did take some criticism for not going British all the way with her outfit, as Givenchy is obviously a French fashion house. But with her second dress of the day, she did stick just with Britain, changing into a full-length, quite fitted halter-neck Stella McCartney dress, though it did flare out a little towards the bottom. It had a short train and dipped quite low at the back. For jewellery, she added a blue aquamarine ring which had belonged to Princess Diana. Towards the end of 2018, on the 12th of October, Princess Eugenie married Jack Brooksbank at St George's Chapel, Windsor, and for the event she wore a dress designed by British designers Philip Polotto and Christopher DeVos. It had a full-length A-line skirt with full-length sleeves and a deep V-neck, both front and back, which folded down over her shoulders. It ended in a fairly long train, and the material was embroidered with white roses of York, thistles, shamrocks, and finally ivy to represent their home at Ivy Cottage. Eugenie asked for the low back, which was fully on display as she opted not to wear a veil, so that she could show off the scars she bears from a childhood surgery to treat scoliosis, saying, "I had always wanted a low back. Part of it was showing my scar. I believe scars tell a story about your past and your future, and it's a way of getting rid of a taboo." On her head, she wore the rarely seen 1919 Greville Emerald Kokoshnik tiara on loan from her grandmother, and featuring, according to the royal.uk website, brilliant and rose-cut diamonds pavé set in platinum with 6 emeralds on either side. For her evening dress, the princess donned a Zac Posen creation in blush-coloured silk chiffon. It was full-length with long sleeves, pleats on both the dress itself and the cape it incorporated at the back, which was also embroidered with a white rose, and a high neckline which folded back at the shoulders, like her main dress, to flow into the cape. Eugenie later revealed that this dress was inspired by one worn by another princess, this time Grace of Monaco, who wore something similar during her days as an actress in the 1955 movie To Catch a Thief. Last but not least, we have Princess Beatrice, who married Edoardo Mapoli Mozzi on the 17th of July 2020 in the Royal Chapel of All Saints at Royal Lodge in Windsor. This wedding had been postponed due to COVID and was very private, with just a few photos released afterwards. Beatrice did something very unusual for her dress, but which I really liked. She went vintage like only a princess can and used one of her grandmother's old dresses, designed by Norman Hartnell and made in the 1960s. This ivory peau de soie taffeta gown, trimmed with ivory Duchess satin, was slightly adapted for her by royal dressmaker Angela Kelly and designer Stuart Parvin to include organza puff sleeves and a reduction in the width of the full-length skirt, but otherwise it was very recognisable as Elizabeth's dress. It featured a geometric checkered bodice and plenty of diamantes. On her head, Beatrice wore the Queen Mary fringe tiara that her grandmother and Princess Anne had worn at their weddings, and it held in place her long veil, which formed a slight train. Now, I promised at the beginning that I would reveal my favourite and least favourite dresses from today's list, so here goes. My favourite is Princess Catherine's. If I could have one dress on this list to wear myself, it would be that one. I think it was just perfect and timeless, showing both historical and modern trends with its bustle and lace sleeves. My least favourite are actually both of Princess Anne's dresses. Sorry, Anne, I think she's amazing though, one of my favourite royals actually. The outfits just aren't to my personal taste. I don't like the very high neckline and general lack of decoration on the first one, and as much as I love studying the Tudors, those huge sleeves look a bit cumbersome. Imagine trying to eat anything whilst wearing them. Meanwhile, the second outfit was, to be fair, intended to be very low-key and was actually a two-piece rather than a dress, so it wouldn't be most people's first choice for their wedding outfit for that reason. Anne really wasn't going for a major fashion moment there. I hope you've enjoyed this trip through British royal wedding dresses. I know not every bride got a look in, but I trust some of your favourites were there. Let me know below which one of these dresses is your favourite or least favourite, and to learn more about royal weddings, try one of these videos next. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.